Kyushu, Japan, July 28, 1945, 0600 hours, and Lieutenant Colonel Takeshi Yamamoto, commanding the 147th Transport Regiment, had no idea that 8M250 caliber machine guns were about to turn his entire convoy into burning wreckage in a single devastating pass. The morning mist clung to the narrow mountain road between Kagoshima and Miyazaki, as this column of 47 trucks loaded with ammunition and rice stretched for nearly 2 kilometers through the valley, and Yamamoto believed the early hour would protect them from American fighter bombers that had been terrorizing Japanese supply lines since the fall of Okinawa 3 months earlier. His convoy moved slowly through the pre-dawn darkness with headlights off and engines muffled, each driver maintaining just enough distance to see the vehicle ahead, when suddenly the drone of twin Pratt and Whitney R-2800 engines echoed off the mountain walls. The Douglas A-26B Invader, approaching at 322 miles per hour, belonged to the 319th Bombardment Group's 438th Squadron, which had arrived at Machinado Airfield on Okinawa just 1 week earlier on July 21, 1945, after converting from B-26 Marauders to these new attack bombers at Columbia Army Air Base in South Carolina. The pilot, Captain James Mitchell from Oklahoma, had been briefed that Japanese convoys were using the mountain roads of southern Kyushu to move supplies at night and in the early morning hours, trying to avoid the devastating attacks that had already destroyed hundreds of vehicles across the home islands. What made this particular morning different was that Mitchell's A-26B carried the most concentrated forward firepower ever mounted on an American attack aircraft, with 8M250 caliber machine guns packed into the solid nose, firing at 750 to 850 rounds per minute each, plus 6 more 50 calibers in the wings, creating a combined rate of fire approaching 11,900 rounds per minute when all 14 guns fired simultaneously. Lieutenant Colonel Yamamoto first heard the engines at 0603 hours and immediately ordered his drivers to pull off the road and take cover. But the narrow mountain pass offered no escape routes, and the convoy was trapped in a perfect kill zone stretching for 2,000 meters. The Japanese had learned from 3 years of American air attacks that their best defense was to scatter and find cover. Yet this morning the terrain that had protected them from discovery now became their tomb. Yamamoto watched in growing horror as the twin-engine aircraft dropped from 8,000 feet to less than 500 feet in a power dive. Its nose pointed directly at the lead vehicle, where Sergeant Major Kenji Nakamura sat frozen behind the wheel of a Type 94 truck loaded with 7,000 pounds of artillery shells destined for the coastal defense batteries at Miyazaki. The solid nose configuration of the A-26B had been specifically designed at Douglas Aircraft Company's Long Beach facility to maximize forward firepower for exactly this type of ground attack mission, with the 8 nose guns arranged in 4 rows of 2 guns vertically down the centerline of the aircraft. This arrangement, combined with the 6 wing-mounted guns firing outside the propeller arc, meant that Captain Mitchell could deliver what American pilots called a wall of lead in a single firing pass without having to orbit and make multiple runs that would expose him to Japanese anti-aircraft fire. The Japanese had positioned Type 96 25mm anti-aircraft guns every few kilometers along their main supply routes, and Yamamoto's convoy included 2 trucks mounting these weapons. But the gunners had less than 15 seconds from when they first spotted the diving invader until it opened fire. At 0604 hours and 30 seconds, Captain Mitchell squeezed the trigger on his control yoke and all 14M2 machine guns erupted simultaneously, causing the entire 27,000-pound aircraft to shudder violently backward from the recoil. The concentrated firepower of 1450 caliber machine guns firing armor-piercing incendiary rounds at a combined rate of nearly 200 rounds per second created a cone of destruction that no ground target could survive. Each M2 machine gun was firing M2 ball, M1 incendiary, and M8 armor-piercing incendiary ammunition in a linked belt pattern that had been perfected during 3 years of Pacific combat, and the bullets arrived at the convoy traveling at 2,900 feet per second. Sergeant Major Nakamura never had time to react before 173 50 caliber rounds tore through his truck in the span of 1.2 seconds, igniting the artillery shells in a massive explosion that lifted the 6-ton vehicle 15 feet into the air and sent a column of fire and smoke 300 feet skyward. The blast wave knocked down soldiers who had jumped from their vehicles and were running for the tree line, while red-hot shell fragments scythed through the next 3 trucks in line, setting their loads of rice and ammunition ablaze. Private First Class Hiroshi Tanaka, riding in the 4th truck, watched in paralyzed terror as the American aircraft's nose lit up with the muzzle flashes of 14 machine guns, creating what looked like a solid bar of fire stretching across the entire front of the aircraft. The devastating effectiveness of the A-26B's concentrated firepower came from the synchronization of all 14 guns firing at a single aiming point, which Douglas engineers had achieved through careful bore sighting and harmonization at a convergence point of 1,000 feet. This meant that at Captain Mitchell's attack altitude of 400 feet, the bullet streams from all 14 guns created an oval pattern roughly 30 feet wide and 15 feet high, saturating any target within that zone with approximately 198 pounds of projectiles per second. The Japanese had never encountered this level of concentrated automatic weapons fire from a single aircraft, as even the fearsome Republic P-47 Thunderbolt carried only 850 caliber guns, and most American fighters in the Pacific Theater mounted 6 at most. Lieutenant Colonel Yamamoto tried to organize return fire from his 2 anti-aircraft vehicles, but the lead gun truck took 47 hits in its ammunition-ready racks before the crew could traverse their weapon, resulting in a sympathetic detonation that killed all 4 gunners instantly. The second gun truck, positioned near the middle of the convoy, managed to fire 17 rounds before 93 50 caliber bullets shredded the gun mount, the gunner, and the truck's engine block in the span of 0.8 seconds. Private Yukio Sato, manning the second gun position, lived just long enough to see the American aircraft's nose seem to explode with light before his position was obliterated by the concentrated fire of 14 synchronized machine guns. The Pratt Whitney R-2800 27 double Wasp engines powering Mitchell's A-26B each produced 2,000 horsepower, giving the aircraft exceptional speed and climb performance that allowed it to execute what American pilots called one-pass and haul-ass attacks. This tactic had been developed specifically to minimize exposure to Japanese anti-aircraft fire, which had grown increasingly deadly as the Japanese concentrated more and more automatic weapons along their critical supply routes. The 319th Bombardment Group had been training with these tactics at Columbia Army Air Base since February 1945, where pilots learned to approach targets at high altitude to avoid detection, dive steeply to achieve maximum speed, level off at minimum altitude for the firing pass, and then use the Invaders' 359 mile-per-hour maximum speed to escape before enemy gunners could react. As Mitchell's aircraft thundered over the convoy at 320 miles per hour and 400 feet altitude, his navigator and gun loader, Second Lieutenant Robert Thompson, watched through the side windows as the entire Japanese column seemed to disintegrate under the concentrated fire. The A-26B's ammunition load of 6,000 rounds meant that Mitchell could maintain continuous fire for approximately 30 seconds, though pilots rarely fired for more than 3 to 5 second bursts to avoid overheating the gun barrels. In this attack, Mitchell held the trigger down for 4.7 seconds, expending approximately 930 rounds that transformed the mountain road into what Thompson would later describe as a river of fire and twisted metal. Corporal Masaru Watanabe, driving the 12th truck in the convoy, had just enough time to throw himself from the cab before 211 50 caliber rounds turned his vehicle into scrap metal and ignited the 5,000 pounds of aviation gasoline in 55-gallon drums loaded in the back. The resulting fireball engulfed 3 nearby trucks and set the surrounding forest ablaze, creating a wall of flame that blocked the road and trapped the rear half of the convoy. Watanabe, lying in a drainage ditch with his uniform on fire, watched the American aircraft pull up sharply at the end of its run, its twin radial engines roaring as it climbed away at an angle that seemed impossible for such a large aircraft. The 319th Bombardment Group had been specifically chosen for conversion to the A-26B Invader because of their extensive combat experience in the Mediterranean theater, where they had flown 515 missions in Martin B-26 Marauders and earned 2 distinguished unit citations for precision bombing of marshalling yards in Rome and Florence. Colonel Joseph R. Holtzapfel, commanding the 319th since August 1943, had overseen the conversion training at Columbia Army Air Base, where his crews learned to employ the Invaders' unique combination of speed, firepower, and maneuverability in the ground attack role. The group's 4 squadrons, the 437th, 438th, 439th, and 440th, had sailed from San Francisco in May 1945 aboard the USS General John Pope, arriving at Okinawa in early July just as the massive buildup for Operation Olympic, the planned invasion of Japan, was beginning. Lieutenant Colonel Yamamoto, bleeding from multiple shrapnel wounds and partially deafened by the explosions, tried to count his surviving vehicles through the smoke and flames. Of the 47 trucks that had entered the mountain pass, 31 were burning wrecks, another 8 were heavily damaged and abandoned, and only 8 remained operational. More devastating than the vehicle losses were the human casualties, with 143 soldiers killed outright, another 87 wounded, and most of the convoy's precious cargo of ammunition, fuel, and food destroyed. In 4.7 seconds of concentrated fire from 14 and /M250 caliber machine guns, a single A-26B Invader had effectively erased an entire Japanese transport regiment from existence. The psychological impact of attacks like this on Japanese forces cannot be overstated. Major General Toshiro Nagai, commanding the 57th Division in southern Kyushu, wrote in his diary on July 29, 1945, that the enemy's new attack bombers with their concentrated forward guns have made daylight movement impossible and are systematically destroying our ability to supply the coastal defenses. The Japanese had faced American air superiority since 1943, but the arrival of the A-26B Invader with its 14 forward-firing 50 caliber machine guns represented a qualitative leap in ground attack capability that Japanese forces were completely unprepared to counter. The technical superiority of the M250 caliber machine gun, the standard American aircraft weapon of World War II, gave the A-26B a devastating advantage over Japanese ground forces. Each gun fired a projectile weighing 1.7 ounces at a muzzle velocity of 2,900 feet per second, delivering approximately 13,000 foot-pounds of kinetic energy to the target. The armor-piercing incendiary rounds could penetrate 1 inch of face-hardened steel at 500 yards, while the incendiary rounds would ignite fuel, ammunition, and other flammable materials on impact. When 14 of these weapons fired simultaneously in a synchronized pattern, the destructive effect was multiplied exponentially. Captain Mitchell's attack on Lieutenant Colonel Yamamoto's convoy was just one of 22 missions flown by the 319th Bombardment Group against Japanese targets between July 16 and August 14, 1945. Operating from Machinato Airfield on Okinawa, the group's A-26B Invaders ranged across southern Japan and occupied China, attacking airfields, rail yards, port facilities, and supply convoys in preparation for the anticipated invasion of the Japanese home islands. The proximity of Okinawa to Kyushu, only 350 miles, meant that the invaders could strike targets throughout southern Japan and return to base with fuel to spare, allowing for extended loiter time over target areas to hunt for targets of opportunity. The defensive armament of the A-26B also made it a formidable opponent for Japanese interceptors, with remote-controlled dorsal and ventral turrets each mounting twin and /M250 caliber machine guns. These turrets were operated by a single gunner, Sergeant Thomas Anderson in Mitchell's aircraft, who sat in a compartment behind the bomb bay using a sophisticated periscope sighting system. The General Electric remote control system allowed Anderson to track targets smoothly as they passed from the upper to lower hemisphere of the aircraft's defensive coverage, with the guns automatically computing for parallax and bullet drop. Though complex and maintenance-intensive, this system gave the A-26B all-around defensive coverage without the weight and drag penalties of traditional man turrets. Private First Class Akira Yamashita, one of only 12 unwounded survivors from the lead element of Yamamoto's convoy, later testified to American interrogators that the attack happened so quickly that most soldiers never had a chance to take cover. The aircraft appeared from nowhere, diving out of the morning sun, and before we could react, the entire front of the column was engulfed in explosions and fire. The sound was unlike anything I had experienced. Not the individual crack of rifle fire or even the stuttering of a machine gun, but a continuous roar like a giant piece of canvas being torn apart. Vehicles simply disintegrated under the impact of so many large bullets, and men were cut down where they stood. The concentration of firepower achieved by the A-26B's 14 forward-firing guns was a direct response to lessons learned during 3 years of Pacific combat, where American pilots had discovered that Japanese vehicles and fortifications were often more heavily constructed than intelligence estimates suggested. The standard 650 caliber gun armament of the Republic P-51 Mustang or Grumman F-6F Hellcat could destroy soft-skinned vehicles and suppress anti-aircraft positions, but often required multiple passes to ensure destruction of hardened targets. The A-26B's 14-gun armament delivered 2.3 times the firepower of a standard 6-gun fighter in a single pass, dramatically increasing the probability of target destruction while minimizing exposure to return fire. The morning after the attack on Yamamoto's convoy, Japanese engineers from the 54th Independent Engineer Regiment arrived to clear the wreckage and repair the road. Lieutenant Keizo Tanaka, commanding the engineer detachment, reported that the destruction was so complete that individual vehicles could not be identified, with trucks fused together by the intense heat of burning fuel and ammunition. The road surface itself was cratered by exploding ammunition and scored with thousands of .50 caliber bullet impacts, requiring extensive repairs before it could be used again. More ominously, Tanaka noted that the precision and concentration of the attack suggested that American intelligence had exact information about Japanese convoy routes and schedules. Indeed, American intelligence gathering had reached a sophisticated level by July 1945, with signals intelligence from intercepted Japanese radio communications, aerial reconnaissance from F-13 photo reconnaissance variants of the B-29 Superfortress, and information from Filipino and Chinese guerrillas, all contributing to a comprehensive picture of Japanese military movements. The 319th Bombardment Group's intelligence officer, Major William Harrison, maintained detailed maps of Japanese supply routes throughout Kyushu, updated daily with information from 7th Air Force Headquarters. This intelligence allowed American planners to predict with high accuracy when and where Japanese convoys would be most vulnerable to attack. The specific tactical advantages of the A-26B Invader over previous American attack aircraft became increasingly apparent during the 3 weeks of combat operations before Japan's surrender. The aircraft's high cruise speed of 322 miles per hour, compared to 275 miles per hour for the A-20 Havoc it replaced, meant that Japanese anti-aircraft gunners had less time to track and engage attacking aircraft. The Invader's twin Pratt and Whitney R-2800 engines, the same power plants used in the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt and Grumman F-6F Hellcat, were renowned for their reliability and ability to absorb battle damage, with numerous instances of A-20 SIXS returning to base with one engine shot out and the other heavily damaged. Master Sergeant Jiro Kawasaki, commanding a Type 96 25mm anti-aircraft battery near Miyazaki, reported to his superiors that the new American attack bombers were essentially impossible to engage effectively with manual anti-aircraft weapons. They approach at high altitude where our 25mm guns cannot reach, then dive at speeds exceeding 500 kilometers per hour. By the time we can traverse our weapons to track them, they have completed their attack and are climbing away at maximum power. The concentration of their forward firepower is so intense that any position targeted is destroyed before it can return effective fire. The psychological warfare aspect of the A-26B's attacks cannot be ignored. The distinctive sound of 14 synchronized and /M250 caliber machine guns firing simultaneously, described by Japanese survivors as a ripping or tearing sound that could be heard over the noise of explosions and aircraft engines, became a source of terror for Japanese transport units. Colonel Masahiro Fujiwara, chief of logistics for the Japanese 16th Area Army in Kyushu, noted in a post-war interrogation that by early August 1945, Japanese truck drivers were refusing to move during daylight hours and many were deserting rather than face certain death from American air attacks. On August 9, 1945, crews from the 319th Bombardment Group witnessed one of the most significant events in human history when they observed the atomic cloud rising over Nagasaki while returning from a mission against the Kanoya airfield in southern Kyushu. Captain Mitchell, flying his 23rd combat mission in the Pacific, later recalled that, "We were at about 12,000 feet when we saw this enormous cloud rising to the northwest. Must have been 40,000 feet high and still climbing. We didn't know what it was at the time, but it was unlike anything any of us had ever seen. This event would prove to be one of the final acts of World War II, with Japan announcing its surrender just 6 days later on August 15, 1945. The technical evolution that led to the A-26B's devastating firepower configuration had begun in 1941 when Douglas Aircraft Company received a U.S. Army Air Corps requirement for a new attack bomber to replace both the Douglas A-20 Havoc and the Martin B-26 Marauder. The design team, led by Ed Heinemann, Robert Donovan, and Ted R. Smith, created an innovative aircraft that could be configured for different missions by changing the nose section. The original XA-26 prototype, serial number 4119588, flew with a 75mm cannon in the nose, but testing revealed that the slow rate of fire and tendency to jam made this configuration impractical for the fast, low-level attacks that characterized Pacific theater operations. Subsequent testing with various combinations of 37mm cannons and 50-caliber machine guns led to the eventual adoption of the 6-gun and later 8-gun solid nose configuration that became standard on production A-26Bs. The 8-gun nose, introduced with the A-26B 50DL production block built at Douglas's Long Beach facility, represented the maximum practical concentration of firepower that could be achieved within the aerodynamic and weight constraints of the aircraft's design. When combined with the 6 wing-mounted guns, 3 in each wing firing outside the propeller arc, the result was an aircraft that could deliver more concentrated automatic weapons fire than any other single-seat or 2-seat aircraft in the American inventory. The manufacturing process for the A-26B reflected the industrial might of American wartime production, with Douglas Aircraft Company producing 1,355 A-26B variants between 1943 and 1945 at facilities in Long Beach, California, and Tulsa, Oklahoma. Each aircraft required approximately 24,000 man-hours to construct, with the 8-gun nose assembly alone requiring precision boring and alignment of 8 50-caliber gun mounts, ammunition feed systems, and spent case ejection chutes. The nose guns were arranged in 4 vertical rows of 2 guns each, with careful attention paid to the spacing and alignment to prevent interference between adjacent guns during firing. Lieutenant Colonel Yamamoto, recuperating from his wounds at the Kagoshima Army Hospital, submitted a report to Imperial General Headquarters on August 3, 1945, describing the attack on his convoy and its implications for Japanese defensive preparations. He noted that traditional passive defense measures such as camouflage, dispersal, and night movement were no longer effective against an enemy with near total air superiority and aircraft capable of delivering such concentrated firepower. His recommendation that all supply movements be suspended during daylight hours and that anti-aircraft defenses be tripled along major supply routes came too late to be implemented before the war's end. The impact of the A-26B Invader on Japanese military planning in the final weeks of the war extended beyond the immediate destruction of supplies and vehicles. Lieutenant General Isamu Yokoyama, commanding the defense of northern Kyushu, reported to Imperial General Headquarters that the systematic destruction of transport capabilities by American air attacks, particularly the new heavily armed attack bombers, had made it impossible to adequately supply the coastal defense positions being prepared for the anticipated American invasion. Without trucks to move ammunition, food, and reinforcements, the elaborate defensive positions being constructed along the invasion beaches would be nothing more than death traps for their defenders. The human cost of attacks like the one on Yamamoto's convoy was staggering for Japanese forces already weakened by years of war and increasingly isolated from supplies and reinforcements. Medical Officer Captain Hiroshi Nakamura, treating the wounded from the July 28 attack, reported that the injuries inflicted by 50-caliber bullets were particularly devastating, with the high-velocity rounds causing massive tissue damage and often traumatic amputation of limbs. The incendiary effect of the armor-piercing incendiary rounds also caused severe burns, with many casualties dying from a combination of blast injuries, burns, and blood loss before they could receive medical attention. The technological superiority represented by the A-26B Invader was just one aspect of the overwhelming material advantage enjoyed by American forces in the final months of World War II. By July 1945, the United States Army Air Forces had deployed over 7,000 combat aircraft to bases within range of the Japanese home islands, including 592 B-29 Superfortresses for strategic bombing, over 1,000 P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts for escort and ground attack, and now the A-26B Invaders of the 319th Bombardment Group for specialized ground attack missions. Against this aerial armada, the Japanese could muster fewer than 5,000 aircraft of all types, most of which were being hoarded for kamikaze attacks against the expected invasion fleet. The specific technical advantages of the M250 caliber machine gun that made it so effective in the A-26B's concentrated forward firepower configuration included its high rate of fire, exceptional reliability, and the availability of specialized ammunition types for different targets. The standard M2 ball round could penetrate light armor and aircraft skin at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards, while the M1 incendiary round contained a small amount of incendiary composition that ignited upon impact, setting fire to fuel tanks, ammunition stores, and other flammable materials. The M8 armor-piercing incendiary round combined both capabilities, with a hardened steel core for penetration and an incendiary element for secondary damage. Second Lieutenant Thompson, Mitchell's navigator and gun loader, had the responsibility of ensuring that the nose gun ammunition feeds remained clear during combat operations. The 8 nose-mounted and /M2s each had individual ammunition boxes containing 400 rounds in linked belts, with the spent cases and links ejected through chutes in the bottom of the nose section. The complexity of routing 8 ammunition feeds through the confined space of the nose compartment while maintaining proper alignment and preventing jams required careful engineering and constant maintenance. Ground crews of the 319th Bombardment Group's 438th Squadron typically spent 4 hours preparing an A-26B for a mission, with much of that time devoted to loading ammunition and checking the gun systems. The defensive capabilities of the A-26B, while secondary to its offensive armament, were nonetheless formidable. Sergeant Anderson, the gunner on Mitchell's aircraft, controlled both the dorsal and ventral turrets through an innovative periscope system that automatically switched between turrets as he tracked targets passing from upper to lower hemispheres. Each turret mounted 2 and /M250 caliber machine guns with 250 rounds per gun, providing all-around defensive coverage. Though few Japanese fighters challenged the invaders during their 3 weeks of combat operations, the presence of the defensive turrets forced any interceptors to approach from the forward quarter, where they faced the devastating firepower of 14 forward-firing guns. The maintenance requirements for keeping the A-26B's complex weapon systems operational in the harsh conditions of Okinawa during the summer of 1945 challenged the ground crews of the 319th Bombardment Group. The combination of high humidity, salt air, and coral dust required daily cleaning and lubrication of all 14 forward-firing guns plus the 4 turret guns. Chief Master Sergeant Ronald Patterson, heading the armament section of the 438th Squadron, established a rigorous maintenance schedule that required each gun to be removed, completely disassembled, cleaned, and test-fired every 5 missions or 50 hours of flight time, whichever came first. Japanese efforts to counter the A-26B threat included desperate attempts to camouflage supply movements and create decoy convoys to absorb American attacks. Major Yoshiro Taniguchi of the Japanese Army Intelligence Service developed a plan to create false convoy routes using captured American vehicles and dummy supplies, hoping to waste American ammunition and reveal attack patterns. However, the comprehensive American intelligence network quickly identified these deceptions, and the decoy convoys were largely ignored in favor of genuine targets identified through signals intelligence and aerial reconnaissance. The strategic impact of the 319th Bombardment Group's operations with the A-26B Invader, though limited to just 3 weeks of combat, contributed to the complete paralysis of Japanese logistics in southern Kyushu by early August 1945. Combined with the mining of Japanese coastal waters by B-29 superfortresses of the 313th Bombardment Wing, the naval blockade by American submarines and surface vessels, and the systematic destruction of Japanese rail networks by tactical aircraft, the interdiction of road transport by A-26Bs completed the isolation of Japanese defensive positions from their supply bases. One of the most significant technological innovations incorporated into the A-26B was the K-14 gun sight, a gyroscopic computing sight that automatically calculated the lead angle required for hitting moving targets. Captain Mitchell, like most A-26B pilots, found that the K-14 sight was most effective when used against ground targets moving predictably along roads or railways, where the sight's computer could accurately predict the target's future position. The sight projected an illuminated reticle onto a reflector glass in front of the pilot, with the aiming point automatically adjusted based on the aircraft's speed, altitude, and angle of attack. The accumulated combat experience of American pilots by mid-1945 gave them a decisive tactical advantage over Japanese forces. Many of the pilots assigned to the 319th Bombardment Group had flown dozens or even hundreds of combat missions in the Mediterranean theater, attacking German and Italian targets under conditions often more challenging than those encountered in the Pacific. This experience, combined with intensive training on the A-26B at Columbia Army Air Base, meant that pilots like Captain Mitchell could execute complex attack profiles with precision while maintaining situational awareness of threats and targets. Private Takeo Ishikawa, a survivor of Yamamoto's convoy who had been riding in one of the rear vehicles that escaped destruction, later wrote in his memoir about the terrifying efficiency of the American attack. The aircraft came out of nowhere, diving from the morning sky like a bird of prey. There was a sound like the world tearing apart, and the front of our column simply ceased to exist, replaced by fire and smoke and the screaming of dying men. In less time than it takes to draw a breath, 40 vehicles and 200 men were gone. We had faced American aircraft before, but nothing like this concentrated destruction delivered in a single pass. The logistical network supporting the 319th Bombardment Group's operations from Okinawa represented the culmination of 3 years of American experience in Pacific warfare. Aviation fuel arrived daily in tanker ships from refineries in California and Texas, with each A-26B requiring approximately 800 gallons for a typical mission to Kyushu and back. Ammunition ships delivered millions of rounds of 50 caliber ammunition, with consumption rates during the group's 3 weeks of operations averaging 40,000 rounds per day. Spare parts, including replacement gun barrels, engine components, and electronic equipment, arrived by air transport from supply depots in Hawaii and the continental United States. The intelligence support provided to the 319th Bombardment Group included not only target information but also detailed weather forecasting, enemy fighter deployment patterns, and anti-aircraft gun positions. Captain James Wilson, the group weather officer, received hourly updates from weather reconnaissance B-29s flying predetermined routes over the Japanese home islands, allowing him to predict with reasonable accuracy the cloud cover, visibility, and wind conditions over target areas. This information was crucial for planning low-level attacks, where unexpected weather conditions could force an aircraft into clouds or mountains with fatal results. On August 1, 1945, the 319th Bombardment Group launched its largest mission to date, with 32 A-26B Invaders attacking the Tsuiki airfield complex in northern Kyushu. The raid, led by Colonel Holtzapfel personally, demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of massed invader attacks against fixed installations. Approaching at 15,000 feet to avoid detection, the formation split into 4 8-ship elements that attacked from different directions simultaneously, saturating the Japanese defenses and preventing coordinated anti-aircraft fire. In less than 3 minutes, the combined firepower of 32 aircraft, each with 14 forward-firing 50 caliber machine guns, reduced the airfield to burning wreckage, destroying 43 Japanese aircraft on the ground and rendering the runway unusable. Lieutenant Masao Kobayashi, commanding an anti-aircraft battery at Tsuiki, survived the attack and later described it as apocalyptic in its intensity. The sky seemed to rain metal as 32 aircraft attacked simultaneously from all directions. Each aircraft's nose erupted with the flash of multiple guns, and the sound was beyond description. A continuous roar that drowned out even the explosions of burning aircraft and fuel dumps. Our 25mm guns were useless against such speed and firepower. We managed perhaps 30 rounds before my position was obliterated by concentrated fire from at least 3 aircraft. I survived only because I was blown into a drainage ditch by an explosion. The cumulative effect of American air attacks on Japanese morale by August 1945 cannot be overestimated. Colonel Saburo Hayashi, serving on the staff of the Japanese 16th Area Army, wrote in his post-war memoir that the appearance of the new American attack bombers with their multiple forward guns was the final proof that we could not defend against American material superiority. Our soldiers, already weakened by malnutrition and disease, lost what little fighting spirit remained when they saw entire convoys destroyed in seconds by a single aircraft. Many openly spoke of surrender, something unthinkable even 6 months earlier. The technical specifications of the A-26B Invader that made it such an effective ground attack platform went beyond just its armament. The aircraft structure was designed to withstand significant battle damage, with redundant control systems, self-sealing fuel tanks, and armor protection for the crew compartment. The pilot sat behind a 64-pound armor plate that could stop 50 caliber rounds, while armor glass windows provided protection against shell fragments. The aircraft's twin-engine configuration meant that it could return to base on one engine if the other was damaged, a capability that saved numerous crews during the group's operations. Maintenance Sergeant Carl Peterson of the 438th Squadron recorded in his diary the challenges of keeping the A-26Bs operational in the primitive conditions at Machinato Airfield. The coral dust gets into everything, especially the gun mechanisms. We have to strip and clean each gun daily, sometimes twice if there's been a mission. The humidity causes corrosion on any exposed metal within hours. We've jury-rigged canvas shelters over the aircraft to provide some protection, but it's a constant battle. The boys flying these ships don't realize how many hours of maintenance go into each hour of flight time. The radar and electronic systems aboard the A-26B, though primitive by later standards, represented cutting-edge technology for 1945. The aircraft was equipped with an AN/APN-1 radar altimeter that provided precise altitude information during low-level attacks, crucial for maintaining the optimal attack profile while avoiding obstacles. The SCR-522 VHF radio allowed secure communications with other aircraft and ground control, while the SCR-695 identification friend or foe, IFF, transponder prevented friendly fire incidents in the crowded airspace over Okinawa and southern Japan. Major Harrison, the 319th Bombardment Group's intelligence officer, developed innovative techniques for bomb damage assessment using the K-17 aerial cameras mounted in some A-26Bs. These cameras, triggered automatically when the guns fired, provided a visual record of each attack that could be analyzed to determine the effectiveness of different attack profiles and ammunition types. The film from Mitchell's attack on Yamamoto's convoy showed with stark clarity the devastating effect of concentrated .50 caliber fire on soft-skinned vehicles, with individual frames capturing trucks disintegrating under the impact of hundreds of rounds. The human dimension of the air war over Japan in the summer of 1945 involved not just the combatants but also the hundreds of thousands of Japanese civilians who found themselves in the path of American attacks. Mrs. Akiko Tanaka, a farmer's wife living near the mountain pass where Yamamoto's convoy was destroyed, recalled that the noise was terrifying, like thunder that went on and on. Then came the explosions and the fire. The forest burned for 3 days, and the smell of death hung in the air for weeks. We found bodies scattered for miles, some so badly burned they couldn't be identified. The old people said it was like the demons of hell had been unleashed upon us. Technical Sergeant David Murphy, crew chief for Mitchell's aircraft, took pride in maintaining what he considered the finest A-26B in the squadron. She's a complicated bird, with all those guns and systems packed into that sleek frame. The nose guns alone require constant attention to keep them properly aligned and functioning. We've developed our own modifications like adding extra cooling vents for the gun barrels and reinforcing the ammunition feed chutes. Every mission she comes back, we go over her inch by inch, looking for any damage or where that could cause a failure on the next flight. The comparison between the A-26B Invader and its predecessor, the Douglas A-20 Havoc, illustrated the rapid advancement in American aircraft design during World War II. While the A-20 had been an effective attack aircraft with 6 forward-firing .50 caliber guns, its maximum speed of 275 miles per hour and limited range made it increasingly vulnerable to improved Japanese anti-aircraft defenses. The A-26B's maximum speed of 359 miles per hour, combined with its 14 forward-firing guns and improved armor protection, represented a quantum leap in ground attack capability that Japanese forces were simply unprepared to counter. Captain Hiroshi Yamada, a Japanese fighter pilot flying a Nakajima Ki-84 from Kanoya Airfield, encountered a formation of A-26Bs on August 5, 1945, and barely survived to tell about it. I dove on what I thought was a single bomber separated from its formation, but as I closed to firing range, the aircraft's tail seemed to explode with tracers from the remote turrets. I broke off immediately but not before taking several hits in my engine. As I climbed away trailing smoke, I saw the nose of the aircraft light up as it strafed a train below. The concentration of fire was unlike anything I had seen. The entire train seemed to explode simultaneously. I barely made it back to base and never flew again before the war ended. The psychological warfare value of the A-26B extended beyond its actual destructive capability. Japanese propaganda, which had initially dismissed American claims about the new attack bomber as exaggeration, was forced to acknowledge the threat after multiple devastating attacks on supply convoys and airfields. Radio Tokyo, in a broadcast on August 8, 1945, warned Japanese civilians to take cover immediately if they spotted twin-engine aircraft with solid noses, inadvertently confirming the effectiveness of the A-26B and further damaging already fragile morale. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Anderson, operations officer for the 319th Bombardment Group, coordinated the complex mission planning required to maximize the effectiveness of the A-26Bs while minimizing losses. Each mission required detailed coordination with fighter escorts from the 318th Fighter Group's P-47N Thunderbolts based at IE Shima, naval rescue forces positioned along the flight routes, and air-sea rescue squadrons ready to retrieve downed crews. The fact that the 319th lost no aircraft to enemy action during their 3 weeks of combat operations testified to both the effectiveness of this planning and the overwhelming American air superiority by the summer of 1945. The supply chain supporting operations from Okinawa stretched across the Pacific to factories in the United States. The Browning Arms Company plant in Connecticut and the High Standard Manufacturing Corporation in Connecticut produced the IN/M250 caliber machine guns, with wartime production reaching peaks of over 5,000 guns per month. The Frankfurt Arsenal in Pennsylvania and the Lake City Ordnance Plant in Missouri manufactured the billions of rounds of ammunition consumed by American aircraft in the Pacific, with specialized production lines dedicated to the armor-piercing incendiary and incendiary rounds that proved so effective against Japanese targets. Master Sergeant Takashi Fukuda, one of the few Japanese military intelligence specialists to survive the war, conducted a post-war analysis of American ground attack tactics for the Allied occupation authorities. His report noted that the A-26B Invader represented the logical culmination of American tactical aviation doctrine, combining maximum firepower with high speed and survivability to create an aircraft that could destroy any ground target with minimal risk to the crew. He concluded that Japan's failure to develop effective countermeasures to American ground attack aircraft, particularly the heavily armed variants like the A-26B, was a significant factor in the collapse of Japanese logistics in the final months of the war. The mission of August 9, 1945, when crews from the 319th witnessed the atomic cloud over Nagasaki, marked a turning point not just in the war but in human history. Captain Mitchell, returning from an attack on the Kanoya airfield, later reflected, "We had just finished strafing some Japanese fighters on the ground when this enormous cloud appeared to the northwest. It kept rising and rising, must have reached 40,000 feet or more. Some of the guys thought it was a volcano, but it didn't look like any volcanic eruption I'd ever seen. When we landed and heard about the atomic bomb, it all made sense. We knew right then the war was over." The immediate aftermath of Japan's surrender announcement on August 15, 1945, found the 319th Bombardment Group preparing for what would have been their largest mission to date, a coordinated strike on Japanese military installations around Kagoshima. Colonel Holtzapfel had briefed 40 crews for a maximum effort mission scheduled for August 16, but word of the surrender reached Okinawa just as the aircraft were being armed and fueled. The sudden transition from combat operations to occupation duties left many crew members with mixed emotions. Relief at surviving the war combined with an odd sense of anticlimax after the intensity of combat operations. The technical legacy of the A-26B Invader extended far beyond World War II, with the aircraft serving in Korea, Indochina, and numerous other conflicts through the 1960s. The concept of a dedicated ground attack aircraft with maximum forward firepower influenced the design of later aircraft like the Douglas A-1 Skyraider and ultimately the Fairchild Republic A-10 Thunderbolt II, which carried a 30mm cannon capable of destroying modern tanks. The lesson learned from the A-26B's devastating effectiveness against ground targets, that concentrated automatic weapons fire delivered in a single pass could achieve decisive tactical results, became a cornerstone of American close air support doctrine. Statistical analysis of the 319th Bombardment Group's combat operations from Okinawa revealed the extraordinary efficiency of the A-26B in the ground attack role. In 22 missions flown between July 16 and August 14, 1945, the group's aircraft destroyed or damaged an estimated 412 vehicles, 63 locomotives, 291 railway cars, 43 aircraft on the ground, and numerous buildings and military installations. This destruction was achieved at the cost of 0 aircraft lost to enemy action, though 3 A-26Bs suffered minor damage from anti-aircraft fire, and one experienced an engine failure that forced an emergency landing at IE Shima. Lieutenant General Masakazu Kawabe, commanding the Air General Army responsible for the defense of Japan against American air attacks, testified after the war that the arrival of the A-26B Invader in the summer of 1945 represented a qualitative change in American ground attack capabilities that Japanese forces were completely unprepared to counter. Our anti-aircraft defenses, already inadequate against conventional fighters and bombers, were useless against aircraft that could attack at high speed with such concentrated firepower. A single aircraft could now accomplish what previously required an entire squadron. Combined with the enemy's complete air superiority and unlimited supplies of ammunition and fuel, these new attack bombers made any daylight movement suicidal. The personal experiences of the men who flew and maintained the A-26Bs of the 319th Bombardment Group provided a human dimension to the technological superiority represented by the aircraft. Second Lieutenant Thompson, Mitchell's navigator, kept a detailed diary of his missions that survived the war. July 28, 1945. Hit a Jap convoy in the mountains this morning. The destruction was complete. Counted 40-plus burning vehicles after our pass. The concentrated fire from our 14 forward guns is something to see, like a solid stream of tracers reaching out to touch whatever we're aiming at. The Japs never had a chance. War is hell, but at least we're giving better than we're getting. The maintenance challenges faced by the ground crews of the 319th Bombardment Group at Machinado Airfield included not just the mechanical complexity of the A-26B, but also the logistics of operating from a recently captured Japanese airfield. The coral runways, while adequate for operations, generated clouds of abrasive dust that shortened engine life and required frequent filter changes. Fresh water for cooling engines during ground runs was scarce, requiring an elaborate system of cisterns and pumps to recycle the precious liquid. Electric power for maintenance work came from portable generators that ran constantly, their noise adding to the cacophony of an operational airfield. Private First Class Kenji Morimoto, one of the few survivors from the anti-aircraft crews attempting to defend against the A-26B attacks, provided a unique perspective on the aircraft's effectiveness. We had trained for years to engage American aircraft, but nothing prepared us for the speed and firepower of these new bombers. They would appear suddenly, diving from altitude at speeds our guns could not track. The wall of fire from their nose guns would destroy everything in its path before we could even aim our weapons. In my battery of 6 guns, I was the only survivor after a single strafing pass. The psychological effect was devastating. Many gunners simply abandoned their positions when these aircraft appeared. The broader strategic context of the 319th Bombardment Group's operations in July and August 1945 involved preparation for Operation Olympic, the planned invasion of Kyushu scheduled for November 1945. Military planners expected casualties exceeding 1 million American soldiers and many times that number of Japanese military and civilian deaths. The systematic destruction of Japanese logistics and transportation infrastructure by aircraft like the A-26B Invader was intended to isolate and weaken Japanese defensive positions before the invasion, potentially reducing American casualties during the amphibious assault and subsequent ground operations. Sergeant Anderson, the gunner on Mitchell's aircraft, had a unique perspective on the A-26B's combat operations from his position controlling the remote turrets. The periscope system took some getting used to, but once you got the hang of it, you could track targets smoothly from top to bottom. We didn't face many Jap fighters during our missions, they were saving them for the invasion, but the few that tried to intercept us got a nasty surprise from our turret guns. The real show was up front though. When the captain opened up with all 14 forward guns, the whole aircraft would shake, and you could see the tracers reaching out like fingers of death to whatever we were attacking. The industrial infrastructure supporting the production of the A-26B Invader represented American manufacturing at its wartime peak. The Douglas Aircraft Company's Long Beach facility employed over 40,000 workers at its peak, operating 3 shifts around the clock to meet production demands. The assembly line for the A-26B stretched for nearly a quarter mile, with specialized stations for installing engines, armament, electronics, and control systems. Quality control inspectors checked every rivet, wire, and component to ensure that aircraft reaching combat units met the exacting standards required for survival in combat. Colonel Tetsuo Yamamoto, no relation to the convoy commander, a staff officer at Imperial General Headquarters, analyzed the impact of American air attacks on Japanese defensive preparations in a post-war report. The systematic destruction of our transportation network by American aircraft, particularly the new heavily armed attack bombers introduced in the summer of 1945, made it impossible to execute our defensive plans for Ketsu-go, Operation Decision. Without the ability to move reserves, ammunition, and supplies, our elaborate beach defenses would have been isolated and destroyed piecemeal. The concentrated firepower of aircraft like the A-26B could destroy in minutes what it had taken months to build. The technological sophistication of the A-26B extended to its communications and navigation equipment. The aircraft was equipped with the SCR-269 radio compass for navigation, allowing pilots to home in on radio beacons even in poor weather conditions. The BC-453 high-frequency receiver enabled long-range communications with base operations at Okinawa, while the interphone system allowed the 3 crew members to communicate despite the noise of engines, guns, and airflow. These systems, though primitive by modern standards, represented the cutting edge of 1945 technology and gave American aircrew a significant advantage in coordinating complex missions. Flight Sergeant Yoshio Ito, one of the few Japanese fighter pilots to successfully engage an A-26B and survive, described his encounter on August 11, 1945. I was flying a Ki-61 Hien when I spotted a twin-engine aircraft attacking a supply dump near Kumamoto. I dove from above and behind the classical attack position, but as I closed to firing range, the aircraft's upper turret swung toward me and opened fire. I saw the flashes from the twin guns and felt impacts on my aircraft immediately. I fired a short burst and broke away, but my engine was damaged and burning. As I struggled to maintain control, I saw the American aircraft pull up from its attack run, leaving the entire supply dump in flames. I managed to crash land in a rice paddy and survived, but my aircraft was destroyed. The human cost of the air war's final phase was staggering for Japanese forces. Medical records from Japanese military hospitals in Kyushu documented the devastating injuries inflicted by 50 caliber weapons, with traumatic amputations, massive internal injuries, and severe burns being common among survivors of strafing attacks. Dr. Akira Suzuki, chief surgeon at the Kagoshima Army Hospital, noted that the large caliber bullets caused injuries far beyond anything seen from small arms fire, often requiring immediate amputation of damaged limbs to save lives. The hospital's limited supplies of morphine, antibiotics, and blood plasma were quickly exhausted treating casualties from air attacks, leaving many wounded to suffer without adequate pain relief or treatment. The final mission flown by the 319th Bombardment Group before Japan's surrender was a reconnaissance flight on August 14, 1945, searching for any signs of Japanese military activity that might indicate resistance to the surrender order. Captain Mitchell, flying his last combat mission of the war, led a flight of 4 A-26Bs on a low-level reconnaissance of southern Kyushu, ready to engage any hostile forces encountered. The flight encountered no resistance, finding only abandoned airfields, empty roads, and the scattered wreckage of previous attacks. The war that had consumed millions of lives was finally ending, brought to a close in part by the overwhelming technological superiority represented by aircraft like the A-26B Invader. Post-war analysis by the United States Strategic Bombing Survey concluded that the interdiction of Japanese ground transportation by tactical aircraft played a crucial role in the collapse of Japanese resistance. The survey specifically noted that aircraft equipped with multiple forward-firing weapons, like the A-26B with its 1450 caliber machine guns, were particularly effective in destroying vehicle convoys and train traffic with minimal expenditure of aircraft and crew resources. The concentrated firepower delivered in a single pass reduced exposure to anti-aircraft fire while ensuring target destruction, a tactical lesson that would influence American military aviation doctrine for decades to come. The legacy of Lieutenant Colonel Yamamoto's destroyed convoy extended beyond the immediate tactical loss. The systematic destruction of Japanese logistics forced military commanders to make impossible choices between defending coastal areas against invasion and maintaining reserves in interior positions. Without reliable transportation, Japanese forces were effectively immobilized, unable to respond to American attacks or reinforce threatened positions. The 47 trucks destroyed in a single 4.7-second burst from an A-26B's 14 guns represented not just a loss of vehicles but the collapse of Japan's ability to sustain military operations. Squadron leader Frank Mitchell of the Royal Air Force, attached to the 319th Bombardment Group as an observer, provided an outside perspective on American ground attack tactics. The concentration of firepower achieved by the A-26B was extraordinary. In Europe, we considered the Typhoon with its 420mm cannon to be heavily armed, but the Invaders' 1450 caliber guns delivered devastating firepower with remarkable accuracy. The American approach of overwhelming firepower delivered in a single pass minimized aircraft losses while maximizing target destruction, a lesson we took back to the RAF for incorporation into our own tactical doctrine. The technological superiority demonstrated by the A-26B Invader in the summer of 1945 represented more than just advanced engineering and industrial production. It embodied the culmination of 3 years of combat experience in the Pacific, where American forces had learned through bitter experience the importance of speed, firepower, and survivability in the ground attack role. Each improvement, from the raised canopy for better visibility to the synchronized 14-gun armament, addressed specific deficiencies identified in combat. The result was an aircraft perfectly suited to its mission of destroying Japanese ground forces with minimal risk to American aircrew. As the sun set on August 15, 1945, marking the end of World War II, the men of the 319th Bombardment Group gathered at Machinado Airfield to celebrate their survival and mourn their losses. Though the group had suffered no combat fatalities during their 3 weeks of operations with the A-26B, they had lost friends and comrades during their previous campaigns in the Mediterranean. The A-26B Invader, with its distinctive solid nose bristling with gun barrels, had proven itself as one of the most effective ground attack aircraft of the war, its 14 forward-firing and /M250 caliber machine guns capable of erasing entire Japanese columns in a single devastating pass. The story of the A-26B Invaders' brief but decisive combat career in the Pacific serves as a reminder of the terrible efficiency of modern warfare. In just 22 missions over 3 weeks, a single bombardment group equipped with these aircraft inflicted destruction that would have required entire armies in previous wars. The concentrated firepower of 14 synchronized machine guns, delivered with precision at high speed, represented a revolution in tactical air power that Japanese forces, despite their courage and determination, simply could not counter. The burning wreckage of Lieutenant Colonel Yamamoto's convoy, destroyed in less than 5 seconds by a single aircraft, stood as a testament to the overwhelming technological superiority that helped bring World War II to its conclusion.